My grandma's lawyer had notified both me and my dad when the process began, and it had been shortly after the funeral. He was very upset that I hadn't contacted him first, but even the lawyer had to hire a professional to locate him, so it was ridiculous for him to even expect that I'd go to such lengths for a person who hadn't checked on us even once in the last 6 years. We didn't speak after that for months until recently, when the reading of the will took place, and it was a virtual meeting since we were in different states and he was too busy to fly down here. There, I was told about what I'd be getting out of this, and my dad only had one dusty old painting, so there wasn't much to say there. She'd also left my maternal grandparents a little money and some of her jewelry as a thank you for everything they'd done, so they were part of the meeting as well. We were all present to witness the spectacular meltdown that my dad had once he realized that he was only getting one painting that wasn't even worth much. He yelled at me and accused me of stealing his life from him, said that I was a crook and whatnot. It got to a point where he had to be removed from the video conference by the lawyer so we could end it. He'd have to be there to sign a couple of documents in a few weeks anyway, so I knew that this wasn't over as long as he didn't get what he wanted, but I didn't care. I knew that I deserved all of this and that I'd worked hard for it. It hadn't just all been handed to me, but I'd earned it. Throughout college, I would make sure to teach my grandma all she needed to know, and sometimes we'd even end up on calls at odd hours so that she could consult with me before making any financial decisions. So I was not only keeping my grades up, but I was also working on keeping the business up and running. I was also running the social media page along with a couple of interns I'd hired, so I'd been working for the business right from my college days. I'd earned every bit of this, and yet that didn't seem to be good enough for him. I wasn't worried at the time, but 3 days back, my dad came by to visit me, and it was a very emotionally charged reunion for us. He'd come back for the signing of certain documents that we were already done with, so we didn't need to be there. He told me that he'd come to visit me right after meeting with the lawyer, and even though my grandma's attorney refused to tell him about my inheritance, he'd figured out that I'd inherited the business and the house. While he was at the door, he told me that he just wanted to talk and clear the air because it had been a long time since he left. He didn't want our relationship to get worse and worse with time, so I decided to have a discussion with him once and for all so we could clear the air or whatever. Most of whatever he said just sounded like excuses, and I wasn't too touched by it. He was in a bad space and was still struggling to do well at work. He wanted a fresh start without any reminders of his past. He was really stressed out and stuff, blah blah blah. It wasn't the struggle story he thought it was, and it definitely didn't excuse him for whatever he'd done. I was just waiting for him to get that story over with when he told me that now that he was back, he wanted to join me and come on board as an investor or maybe even a co-owner. I said no without even thinking about it because there was just no way that it was happening. Not after he literally abandoned me and my grandma and didn't even bother to contact us ever after that. He'd let me and my grandma down on multiple occasions and had never once stepped up to be the father that I deserved or the son that she deserved, so now, he didn't just get to hop on the bandwagon and piggyback on what was supposed to be my success. I told him that I wasn't okay with that, and if that's really what he was here for, then he could just leave because it was never going to happen. He could save his breath instead of trying to convince me, but he went on to get annoyed and tried to make it seem like that's not all he was here for. He even said that he genuinely wanted to reconcile with me and rebuild our relationship, but he'd blown his cover already, so I wasn't going to fall for any more of what he was saying. I didn't even want to hear him out, but he went on and on about how I was overreacting and he just wanted to help. At one point, I told him that if he didn't leave then I would call the police, and he flared up at that. He called me ungrateful, and of course, he played the mom card and told me that my mother would have hated this. I didn't even care and told him that if my mom was around then maybe he would have still stuck around, but unfortunately, I kind of grew up without either parent, and it was mostly my grandparents who raised me. So if I owe anyone anything, it was them and not him. He always just did the bare minimum for us and thought that it was alright, so now he could expect the bare minimum in return too. That seemed to shut him up for a while, but I could see that he was getting all teary-eyed, and that made me really uncomfortable because my dad hardly cries. I've literally never seen my dad cry ever, not even when his dad passed away and they were pretty close. So his crying was a huge deal because he was mostly a stoic guy. I took a step back at that moment, and he told me that I had no right to that business because at the end of the day, it was his father who had built it for him, and now I'd just swooped in and stolen it all away from him. Then he walked out and I could actually hear him crying as he walked away. It's been 3 days and I can't help but think that maybe what he said was true. This business had been intended by my grandfather to be taken over by my father eventually, but he'd rejected it, and so this came to me. The least I can do is make him a partner in the business, but if there's no trust then there's no point. I don't understand what to do.